son repeatedly attacks and bites me with unprovoked violence, doctors can't find a cause, and love fails to reach him. I used to believe that the bond between a parent and their child was unbreakable, that it was something automatic and everlasting. In my mind, if I poured out love for my children, they would reflect it back easily, and all I would have to fear would be fate's cruel twists, an accident or illness that might take them away too soon. But that isn't true. There are possibilities that are far worse than I ever imagined. My son is 8 years old, and I cannot be in the same room with him without being attacked. He scratches, hits, and bites me, constantly, relentlessly, until we're forced apart. When he bites, it's as hard as he can manage. My arms are 50% covered in bruises, the marks a roadmap of half-healed wounds. I've done nothing to provoke this, nothing to deserve it. I've tried everything I can think of: love, strict discipline, ignoring his outbursts, talking and reasoning with him. Nothing breaks through. If anything, his anger and violence have only worsened over the years. We've gone through therapy. We've sought diagnoses, anything that might explain what's happening. We've tried medication and also tried to do without medication, swinging between hope and desperation. No one knows what's wrong with him. Not his therapist. Not the doctors. Not me. On Thursday, I watched the movie About Time. It's a bittersweet story about how limited our time really is and why we need to savor every moment. There's a scene where an 8-year-old boy plays in the waves with his father for what will be the very last time. They just enjoy a beautiful day together, aware it's fleeting. Watching that, I completely fell apart. My son only ever communicates through violence, through pain. Last night, something inside me finally gave out. I cried for hours, mourning not the life I have, but the one I once expected, the hope of a loving relationship with my son. I let it go. He's only 8 years old, and he already hates me so much. Sometimes, I think it's even worse than if I had outlived him. I'm telling you this, there are heartbreaks beyond what you imagine. Please, if your loved ones care for you, don't take it for granted. We're pursuing a second psychological evaluation soon in hopes that something will finally make sense. Many people are convinced that someone else must be hurting him, unable to accept our reality, but there's no evidence to support that. No one in his life has an opportunity to harm him. When he's not at school, he's with us, except for the very rare evening when a trusted, close family member watches him. We've asked him, directly, if anyone is hurting or touching him inappropriately, and he's always said no. Both our children know what's inappropriate, and that they should always speak up. I believe, with all the care we've taken, that outside abuse is the least likely explanation for what we're facing. Update 1. The laughs we shared were more than just moments of relief, they were nothing short of therapeutic. It's funny how sometimes laughter is the only thing that keeps you sane, though I'd honestly advise anyone, please, never have kids of your own if you're not ready for chaos like this. After a long stretch of uncertainty, we finally decided to have my son evaluated again. It had become painfully clear we were facing more than just ADHD. It took time, first, to find somewhere we really believed would get it right, and then more time to wait for an open slot. Finally, today, we got the official word. He has ADHD, and not the mild kind. His is severe. But that wasn't all. He's also mildly autistic. On top of that, the evaluation revealed high anxiety, and clear signs of depression. People had thrown out ideas at me, maybe pandas, maybe odd, and he does have some of the symptoms, but just like with the autism, there were aspects of his behavior that didn't fit those perfectly either. For instance, he's unusually social for a kid with autism. These inconsistencies, along with his young age and the severity of his ADHD, masked the autism for a long time and made the diagnosis especially tricky. I've often asked myself, why does he seem to hate me? From what I've pieced together, it all started around halfway through his kindergarten year. His disabilities made it so hard for him to keep up with his peers, and it left him feeling inadequate. But at just 5 years old, he had no clue how to process those feelings. So he'd come home from school and just lose it, destroying the house in his frustration. We tried to talk him down, tried to reason patiently, but it never worked. Nothing we did seemed to help. Until I discovered the only thing that snapped him out of it, the sharp, harsh command from my deep, loud voice. Stop that. It startled him enough to halt the chaos. It worked, so that's what I kept doing. I had no idea at the time that I was using his anxiety, that I was scaring him into behaving. Eventually, what I thought was discipline made me into this figure of fear, the person whose presence spiked his anxiety, until it twisted into something like hate. Now, things are changing. When I come home from work, he doesn't immediately attack me anymore, which I take as progress. But, often, he still retreats to his room and wants to be alone. In public, he's better, but at home, the anxiety he associates with me lingers, just less severely than before. So how did I even begin to fix it? First, I kept my distance. I let things cool off for a few weeks. When he did attack, I stopped responding with anger or force. No more shoving him off, I stayed calm. Instead, my wife would step in and correct him. Eventually, I realized I couldn't avoid this forever. I needed to talk to him about everything. Knowing what happened whenever I entered his room, immediate attack mode, I started suiting up in a winter coat and gloves, then went and prepared. Every time, I'd defend myself as calmly as I could, and when things escalated, I gently restrained him on the floor and just talk. I explained my behavior, told him how I never meant to be scary. It was the only way I knew to stop the madness when nothing else worked. For weeks, this became our routine. He attacked, I restrained, I talked, he stayed silent. Nothing seemed to get through. Then, finally, I found something that clicked. I told him I loved him and always would, told him he's special, talented, and that no matter what, I'd always be proud of him. That time, he cried in my arms, got angry, and begged me to stop, but I kept at it. I pushed through his resistance. After a couple of weeks repeating this, something shifted. His reaction started to change, it got easier for him to hear it, and I knew he was really starting to believe it. Now, we found our own rhythm, a little routine I call daddy therapy time. When I go into his room and say, let's talk, he immediately straightens out on his bed like a pencil, and I gently compress him down into the mattress while his head hangs off the edge, which for some reason he finds calming. It isn't a perfect fix, but for the first time in a long time, it feels like real progress, something honest and hopeful in the middle of the chaos. Update 2. Recently, 2 major changes inspired me to reflect on how far we've come. First, the outbursts have stopped, no more biting, no more attacks, no more objects hurled at the walls. The house feels calm again. We even repainted and put the decorations back up, reclaiming our space and filling it with lightness. Second, at school he created a piece of art about what he loves most, and incredibly, I made the cut alongside his mom. That moment felt profound, like a marker of our healing. Things have finally settled into a kind of normalcy I'd almost forgotten. Parenting my son has been a journey through rough terrain. He copes with ADHD, mild autism, mild OD, high anxiety, and mild depression. Every method of discipline turned tricky. Negative corrections would escalate as odd, but praise and positive guidance were somehow just as intolerable for him. The smallest misstep and we were back to square one. We still do what I call daddy therapy time, but not daily any longer. Now it's reserved for when he truly needs it. I've learned that when I need to correct his behavior, the only route that works is pressing him gently into his bed or the couch, giving him physical grounding while I calmly explain what went wrong and what he should do instead. I stick to this method because it's the only one he receives without resistance, and each time, it builds a little more trust between us. We also started him on something called neurotherapy. The process seemed wild to me at first, electrodes on his head, performing tasks that looked like something out of a sci-fi novel. But I can't deny the results. When his therapist went on vacation for 2 weeks, we felt the difference. The progress stalled. I have no idea how long we'll be able to afford it with the economy the way it is, but I hope we can keep it going for as long as he needs. I've thrown myself into Cub Scouts with him too, just the 2 of us. That one-on-one connection has done wonders to restore our bond. Being forced into uninterrupted time together was utterly necessary to start turning things around between us. For anyone else out there struggling with similar challenges, don't lose hope. Progress can be so hard-won, but it's possible. Hang in there. Final update. 2 weeks ago, my son asked for me. Not the way he asked for a snack, not the way he called for help with a Lego piece that wouldn't click, but me specifically. It was bedtime. He stood in his doorway with his hair plastered to his forehead from a too-hot bath, and he said, "Can you do the squish thing?" It took a second to understand he meant our routine, straight as a pencil on the mattress, his head hanging off the edge, my palms firm across his shoulders and chest like a weighted blanket that breathed. I walked in without the coat, without gloves, unarmored. He didn't flinch. I pressed down, slow, the way he likes, and he closed his eyes. After a while he whispered, "I didn't like you before." He paused. "I do now." He said it like he was handing me a fragile, important object and wanted to make sure I didn't drop it. We had a storm the next night. The kind that comes fast and breaks the sky open. Thunder rattled the windows, and the dog crawled under the table, and I braced myself like always for the sprint and the panic in the teeth. He padded into the living room on his own and climbed into my lap. He took my hands and placed them, one on his chest and one over his eyes. "Do the green voice," he said. We'd started calling the old barked command the red voice, and the soft one that doesn't make his stomach shrink the green voice. So I told him, in green, that the house was a safe ship and the thunder was far away drums and that his dad wasn't going anywhere. He fell asleep while the world shouted. For once I didn't. School called the next week, but it wasn't the usual call. It was the counselor, and she sounded curious. They'd had a fire drill. He used to bolt, ears covered, sobbing, elbows wild. This time he stopped at the line of tape on the floor and looked at the teacher. She pointed to him, and he pointed to the backpack we'd learned to keep in the cubby with his noise-canceling headphones tucked inside. He put them on himself. He walked out with the class, eyes on the marching feet in front of him. When I picked him up that afternoon, he told me that when the alarm started he imagined my hands pressing him down, not to hold him, but to hold him together. He called it portable squish. He said it like a magician revealing a trick. We camped with scouts that weekend. Last time we tried, he lasted 12 minutes before he was twisting the tent zipper like it owed him money and I was carrying a flailing octopus back to the car at midnight. This time he sat next to me on a wet log and threaded worms onto hooks with surgical focus while the other kids shouted about the size of their shadows on the tent wall. After s'mores, the boys were comparing burnt marshmallow techniques and he pressed his shoulder to mine and almost imperceptibly leaned his weight. It was tiny, but I felt the old defensive instinct lift out of me like a splinter. Later, when everyone else was asleep and the forest was making 1,000 noises that used to make him absolutely feral, he nudged me and said, "Ask me questions." Green voice. I asked him about the future, where he would live, what his job would be, whether he'd have a pet lizard or a dog. He told me he wanted a truck and a shed full of tools. He told me he wanted to build things that didn't exist yet. He said maybe he would be a dad. He said, "Probably I'll be nice." There was one more surprise I didn't expect. After months of wondering why I could tweak one tiny variable in our house and watch him spiral or smooth out, I finally scheduled my own evaluation. I sat in a chair across from a woman who asked me to remember strings of numbers backward and told me to connect the dots in a pattern as fast as I could. Somewhere in the 4th page of questionnaires, I recognized my son's handwriting in mine. The results came back and the psychiatrist explained my brain to me like a familiar neighborhood scene from above for the first time. ADHD, obvious if I'd been looking with the right eyes, and a handful of traits that share a border with my son's autism. It was as if a puzzle piece I thought had been missing for years had been hiding in my pocket. It didn't fix anything magical, but it did change everything. I stopped waging war on the parts of me that looked like him. I started copying the accommodations I was making for him and making them for us. I stopped wearing the heavy work boots that thudded through the hallway and made him flinch. We made the morning quiet on purpose. I whispered his name the first time I needed his attention, and if that didn't work, I tapped the doorframe twice. He made a whole ritual out of it, a game where I used 2 taps and he tapped back 3, and somehow, communication wasn't a collision anymore. We had a strange, small rite of passage a few nights later. He let me cut his nails. That's nothing in most homes. Here, it was a ceremony. It has always been a classic sensory obstacle for him. Fingers splayed, teeth bared, every snip an offense. He put his hands in mine and watched carefully while I cut. He monitored my breathing like a surgeon. Halfway through, he said stop. I froze. His eyes were big, not with fear, just calculating. I want them even, he said. He held his pinky up and compared it to his thumb. I lined them up and did the last tiny clip. He nodded, satisfied, then took the clippers and did my hand. So you know, he said. He made me a picture at school, 2 robots, all square shoulders and antennae, plugging themselves into the same outlet. He labeled it charging together. He taped it above his bed. It's directly across from where I kneel for our therapy time, which he now schedules. He needs to be the one to choose, he told me, or it feels like I'm trying to fix him. So now he asks. He'll be building a tower and he'll look up and say, "Squish at 7?" Like he's checking if I'm free for a meeting. It turned our routine into his agency, and it was like everything clicked into place. We hit a snag I didn't see coming and it didn't explode. His neurotherapist had to cancel for 3 weeks due to a family emergency, and I braced for the backslide that used to land us in tears and fresh holes in the drywall. Instead, he asked if we could do the electrode game at home. We obviously couldn't do the real thing, but we made our own version. We stuck blue painter's tape to his forehead and I clipped clothespins to his ears and we pretended that if he kept his body like a statue and his mind like a lake, a spaceship on the TV would fly, straight instead of wobbly. He held so still. He invented his own biofeedback out of imagination and stubbornness, and it worked well enough to bridge the gap until his therapist came back. When she returned, he told her all about our fake electricity. She laughed and said she wished all her kids were as creative. He corrected her, "Not kids," he said. Me. I'm almost scared to write this part because it feels like saying a spell out loud. He stopped calling me by my first name. He did that for a long time, probably because it made me a person he could push away instead of a dad he couldn't manage. Now, when he calls from his room, he says dad, and the word lands in me so gently it's like a hand on my back guiding me through a doorway. The other day he was building ramps out of books for little cars, and the ramp collapsed and one of the cars sailed into the wall with a thwack that would have started World War III 6 months ago. He froze. He glanced at me. I could see the decision like a ripple across a pond, fight or ask. He took a breath I recognized because I take it too. Dad, he said. Green help. I'm not going to pretend we don't still have jagged days. We do. He still has a radar for injustice so sensitive he could staff an airport with it. He still chews the collars off his shirts and argues like a lawyer with a grudge. But a month ago, he woke me at 3 a.m. and said, I had a bad dream that you sent me away because I was bad, and then I woke up and you were here. He stood at the side of our bed like a ghost in footy pajamas. He stood there and waited to see if I'd be annoyed. I moved over without saying anything. He climbed in and went to sleep like people do when they're home. People ask me what the turning point was, and I think it wasn't a point at all. It was a lot of small, boring things that slowly quit being impossible. A hand on his chest while it thundered. 2 taps on the doorframe instead of a bark. A pair of headphones in a backpack because the world is loud and not everything has to be bravery. It was discovering that the only way to make him less afraid of me was to be less afraid of him, and the only way to be less afraid of him was to see him, and the only way to see him was to accept that he is not broken and neither am I. He told me in the dark, in his tiny serious voice, that he doesn't hate me. He said it like it was the second most important thing in the world. The first was this: when I say dad, I mean the one who stays. I told him I'm staying. 2 nights ago, my son used my voice on me. I was slicing an onion, not even fancy, sweatshirt sleeves shoved up, the cheap knife we never remember to replace, and I nicked the pad of my thumb deep enough that the world went bright white for a second. Blood makes me dizzy in a stupid, predictable way. I put my hand under the tap and braced for the old pattern to snake out of the pipes, the flinch, the fury, the house turning into a siren. He walked in, spotted the red line blooming down my wrist, and went very still. He didn't scream. He didn't bolt. He tapped the doorframe twice. He dragged a dish towel over with his foot like he was saving his hands for later, told me to sit, and very solemnly pressed my hand into my own chest. He weighed my shoulder with his palms the way I do for him, tiny arms making the big shape he's learned to make. House is a safe ship, he said, monotone, the way he likes it when I do it. Water is the ocean. Tomato paint. He made a face at that last part, humor he delivered like medicine he knew I'd pretend I didn't need. He waved at my wife to grab the keys. On the drive he handed me his headphones and then took them back and put them on himself, assessing, calculating. We both need quiet, he told me, and I let that be the rule. Urgent care is all fluorescent thunder and cold breath. He stood in the corner and did portable squish, his hands flat on his own chest, eyes pinned to the monitor beeping like a nervous bird. When the nurse came in with the numbing needle, he put one finger up at her like a tiny traffic cop. Green voice, he said, and she nodded without missing beat. I watched him watch my face, scanning for storm signs and inventorying the skies. When it was done, he took the discharge papers and folded them into a plane and flew it against my shoulder. Landing, he said. He said it like we were both touching down. We took our first plane in real life a week later. The tickets were bought months ago, a plan I kept moving down the calendar like a meeting I didn't want to admit was happening. My father is getting old in a way that creaks, and there's a tool shed full of rust he wanted to show his grandson. The airport was a test in 1,000 small languages. The conveyor belt sliding his backpack away, he stared it down and handed over the headphones first, like surrendering a crown without a fight. The shoes off ritual, he whispered tap, tap at the edge of the line and I tapped back, the body scanner that hummed and made him stiffen and then unclench. At the gate, he made a runway out of 2 paper coffee cups and lined his toy cars up for boarding. Group A, he told me, and rolled the blue one onto my knee. When we walked onto the plane, he stopped in the doorway and took it in like a cathedral. House that flies, he said. He ran his knuckles along the seatbacks and asked me if the seatbelts were like arms. We buckled into our arms. He hauled my hand under his strap where it hit his ribs and said, very official, we share belt. When the engines roared, I watched his throat work. He closed his eyes and started a breath count we invented on the sofa months ago. 4 in. Hold. 6 out. On the 3rd cycle he reached up and put my palm over his eyes without looking. Cover skies, he mumbled. The plane lifted and so did the spot under my sternum where panic lives. He said, drums far away, before I could, muffled under my hand. During the shiver of turbulence he pressed back into the seat with the kind of bone stillness that used to be all we could hope for, and then he added words, green bump. Not broken. The flight attendant crouched to our row on landing and asked if we wanted to see the cockpit, and he stood in the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back like he'd been a pilot in a former life. He looked at the switches like a field of stars and asked which one made the plane breathe. The captain pointed to a gauge and called it the autopilot. I have dad pilot, he said, then corrected himself without being told. No. I have dad. My father met us outside baggage claim and did the thing older men do when they're overwhelmed and need to stay rooted. He commented on the price of parking. In the truck, my son cataloged every tool on the pegboard in the shed like he was taking attendance. He stuck painter's tape on his own forehead and mine and labeled us with our names in block letters, his way of making us in the same set. He spent an hour sitting in the doorway of that shed while my father, who has never been gentle with anything on purpose, taught him how to oil a hinge like it was a ritual. They spoke in grunts and object words. Rust, my father said, showing him the satisfaction of steel turning smooth. Stay, my son said, pressing 2 fingers into the wood to feel the vibration of the hinge when it swung. He looked at me over the oil can and lifted his chin the way he does when he wants me to see his idea forming. I will build things that breathe, he told my dad, and my dad went very quiet. School called again, and I braced out of habit, but it wasn't a bad story. The microwave in the teacher's lounge had actually smoked out a sandwich and they had to evacuate for real, not a drill. The kindergarten line wobbled and a little girl's hands flew to her ears so hard she looked like she might fold in half. He was already out the door with his class and he broke from his line, which a year ago would have been a catastrophe, and this time it was a mercy. He walked back the 3 steps to her, tapped his chest twice to get her eyes, and held out the spare headphones from his backpack. They have little stickers on them, robots we cut together and stuck on crooked. She took them like he was handing her oxygen. He walked with her, both hands on the straps of his own bag, jaw set the way it gets when he's doing something hard and decided. When they reached the grass, he put his palm on his own sternum and she copied him. The counselor told me later that he didn't talk at all. He just did the green things and waited for her to settle. When the principal thanked him out loud, he said, "Not hero," as if correcting a mispronunciation. Not kids. Me helping. He doesn't like the way people make a circus out of surviving. He wants the tent to be small and the lights off. At home, he built an airport in the hallway and insisted we practice boarding and deplaning like a family drill. He repurposed the doorframe taps into a boarding chime. 2 taps meant line up, no talking, and 3 taps followed by the word green meant, we can say what we need in whispers. He made a curtain out of a sheet between 2 chairs and wrote quiet ship on a paper sign in lowercase despite what the letters wanted to do under his hand. He guarded it like an air traffic controller guarding airspace. No one goes in without the taps. He let his little sister sit in there and draw with both feet pressed into his thigh so she could use his weight instead of throwing things. He shushed me when I laughed. "It's not a joke, Dad," his face said, before he forgave me for being loud with a tap and a smile that was real enough to embarrass me for underestimating him again. We had one bad flicker that didn't become a fire. I slipped and let a red voice edge into the night when a glass shattered in the sink. It happens faster than I like admitting. He looked me dead in the eye and tapped twice on the counter, crisp, authoritative. "Reset," he said, and then, because he knew my pride would balk, he added the thing he knows makes me softer, "Please." I took a breath that was longer than the problem and started over. "The house is a safe ship," I said. He handed me the broom like a baton being passed on purpose. "Last night, he lost his first tooth during squish time." I felt the tiny snap under my palm where his mouth is always talking. He spat the tooth into my hand and stared at the dot of blood on his lip with professional interest. "Tomato paint," he said, matter of fact. He wrote a note to the tooth fairy that said in crooked pencil, "Be quiet," and then he left the doorframe open an inch and tapped twice like calling a plane in. This morning he held the dollar like it was a fossil and told me, in his tiny serious voice, that the fairy has a green voice too. He said it like he was letting a club expand by 1. He doesn't call me by my first name anymore. He calls me Dad, the way someone calls the dog in Out of the Rain, no yelling, just that soft trust that the thing you love will come when you use the right word. Tonight, he dragged 2 kitchen chairs together and made me sit in the cockpit of our fake plane. He climbed onto my lap, tapped twice on my chest, and said, "Landing." I asked him, like a passenger who needs to hear it again, if we're going to be okay. "We already are," he said, and he said it like the truth had weight. He pressed my hand flat over his heart and covered it with both of his. We stayed until the house settled around us like a runway lighting up one by one, and I could feel the thing we've been practicing for months happen without drama at all. We touched down, and the sky outside stayed exactly the same. He made me a badge out of painter's tape and stuck it to my shirt like I was being promoted. He wrote in block letters, slow like he was dodging landmines, "Green only." We were standing at the threshold of the Science Museum on a Friday night, sleeping bags rolled under our arms, the air full of popcorn and static and other people's children. He looked up at the glass belly of the whale skeleton that hangs in the lobby like a cathedral that has remembered how to swim and said, very businesslike, "That is a house that is bones." He checked his backpack inventory with his hands, headphones, soft t-shirt, robot stickers, 2 apples. He knocked his knuckles twice on the ticket counter to hear what the building sounded like on the inside. He doesn't trust places until he knows how they answer taps. The museum staff had turned the ocean hall into a campsite in a way that would have made me wild when I was his age. Rows of sleeping bags under the whale, a planetarium show at 9. Flashlight scavenger hunt through the dinosaur footprints. He didn't look at any of that. He looked at the exits and at the ceiling and at the vents exhaling their cold breath and at the sign that said quiet area in soft blue letters near a bench. He lifted his chin the way he does when he decides he will make something different than it is. "We need a hangar," he told me, and then he corrected me when I called it a quiet corner. "Not corner. Hangar." He dragged 2 folding chairs so the backs made a little doorway and he taped a piece of paper between them where he wrote in crooked pencil, "Green ship." All lowercase. He tapped twice on the chair frame and looked to see if anyone looked at him like he was wrong. A kid with freckles and a shirt that said birthday crew wandered over and stood in the doorway holding a stuffed lemur by one leg. My son stuck his palm out flat like a crossing guard of feelings. "2 taps to come in," he said. The kid tapped twice on the chair with the lemur's foot. "Okay," my son said, and he let him in. It wasn't official until it had a ritual. He knows how to make rituals now. The planetarium was the test. It always is. All that sound tucked under a black bowl. The staff person warned us that there would be simulated thunder for the Big Bang and my son squeezed my wrist and said, not panicking, just labeling, "Green bump. Not broken." We sat in the front in case we needed to leave without scraping past 12 knees. He put his headphones on and then took one ear off and put it against my arm. He likes to hear my skin be ordinary. Halfway through, when the stars started falling in a way that would have lit his nervous system on fire other years, he leaned into me and did portable squish on himself, palms flat on his sternum, and I matched his breathing in the dark with my hand where he slid it. He whispered, "Sky Room," like he was renaming it so it would behave. On the way back to the whale, A boy was crying the very specific way a person cries when the floor has become water. His dad had the red in his voice that lives in everyone on nights like this. "Please, stop," whispered into the hairline of a kid who was not here to be pleaded with. My son stopped dead in the hallway. He looked at me with a look that said, "Do not fix what I am about to try." He walked over and stood 2 arm lengths away and put his hand on his own chest and tapped 2 fingers there, a signal he uses now like a flare. Then he pointed to the boy's chest, asking without words if he could copy. The boy watched him like you watch someone building a bridge you could use. My son showed him the breath we do. He didn't say the words out loud. He mouthed them, like the room would feel them without hearing it. The dad looked at me and I put my finger to my lips and did what I have spent months learning. I stayed. When they both had air back, my kid held up one finger to the dad, not bossy, just exact. "Green voice," he said, and because people will almost always do what a small, serious person asks if he is precise enough, the man nodded, and his mouth softened into something that didn't scare his own child. My son walked away like nothing spectacular had happened. He pointed to our sign, "Hangar is open," he told the boy, as if announcing the weather. He got lost for 6 minutes later and I got to find out what kind of animal I am when my heart picks up speed. It wasn't a dramatic movie loss. He needed to pee, and I didn't hear him say so because I was listening to a staff person describing the difference between a dolphin and a porpoise with a laser pointer. He is quiet when he decides he has a plan. He followed the little men on the signs and then came back a different way, and the museum is a maze if you take one wrong haul. I stood under the whale and made the mistake of saying his name with my mouth instead of with my hands. The name got swallowed by everything the building breathes. And then I heard it. A crisp, deliberate tapping that had no business being in a museum unless it belonged to us. 2 taps on glass, pause, 3 taps. He was at the tide pool exhibit wrapping a pattern on the plexiglass with his knuckles, the same code he uses on the doorframe at home to tell me he's okay and wants me, both. I tapped back on the metal railing with a ring I never remember I have, 3, pause, 2. He came around the corner with his arms pinned to his sides because sometimes that's how he keeps all the electricity from leaking out. He put his forehead against my chest and said, "Not apologizing, just reporting, I used our noise." He doesn't say I was lost. He says I called you, and you came. The sleeping bags came out under the whale, and 50 kids pretended to be good at sleep at the same time. The lights dimmed in a way that made me think of aquariums and prayer. He arranged his pillow like he was docking a boat. He made me sleep with my foot against his calf so he could feel where I was without asking. He laid on his back and stared at the white ribs and said, "We are in a spine that remembers the ocean." He fell asleep inside a sentence like that, and I lay there and counted the clicks of the HVAC until I understood that this is what normal can mean, not the absence of storms, just the confidence that the hull will hold. At 3 in the morning, a motion-activated dinosaur roared in the distance because some parent was trying to find a bathroom without a flashlight, and 20 small bodies levitated. He half sat, eyes wide and not actually awake, and then collapsed back down when my palm found its spot. "Drums far away," he said into the sleeping bag, slurred, the way we say things now to remind our animal bodies that we are the captains. He woke up at 5 and watched the ceiling until the whale wasn't a whale anymore and was just a lot of beautiful bones. In the morning he got an idea that took over his whole face. He went to the craft table and took 2 paper cups and a length of yarn and made a string telephone like a joke from a science textbook. He put 1 cup to my ear and 1 to his and said, "No tapping. Talking wire." He pulled it taut across the aisle, across 2 sleeping families, careful not to touch anybody with the string, and said into his cup, "Permission to board," like a kid pretending to be a pirate who has studied the manuals for air traffic control. I whispered into my cup, "Permission granted," and the string hummed in my fingers. He grinned like someone had handed him a map of nerves. We kept that string for 2 more days. He used it at the barber on Sunday when he sat in the chair like a soldier and told the man, in the most official green voice I've ever heard, "I am the one who says stop and go." He gave the barber my cup and kept his, and when the clippers buzzed too close to the crease by his ear, he said into the cup, not into the air, pause, and the man stopped in a way that told me he had been given an instruction he respected. He took a breath and tapped the armrest twice, a little runway for his heart, and said, "Proceed," and the cut went on like a plane taxiing slowly and nobody died. He left the shop with hair that looked like a reasonable boy's hair and the string around his neck like a medal. He keeps building things that the rest of us can use if we learn his language. He came home from school with a stapled booklet his teacher helped him type because writing is still a shaky ship for his hand. He titled it Rules for Quiet Sky and he put it in the school library himself and then came home and put a copy on our fridge. Rule 1 was technically not a rule at all. It said, "I can ask." That was it. No verbs, because that's not how he thinks. Just the permission, big as a banner. He tested it that night in the most boring way that made me want to clap. He knocked the Lego tower over by accident and the car shot under the stove and the dog barked and the 3 of us were suddenly a set of dominoes ready to teach physics the hard way. He froze, throat working, and then he tapped the counter twice and said, "Steady, green help." I got on my knees and used the broom handle to fish the car out and he watched my face the whole time like it was weather. He asked me about fireworks, because they're coming whether we like it or not. He said it the way you ask if the ocean will remember how to be water next week. He said, Can we make a tent with signs, a hanger for the loud sky? He started making it that night, a sheet draped over 2 chairs with a sign that said quiet ship in his lowercase that doesn't care what the letters want to be, the string phone dangling from the front like a radio. He wrote 2 scripts on index cards with a marker and taped one inside for him and one outside for me. His said, I can ask for green. Mine said, I can be green. He slid the card to the edge with one finger so it would catch my eye at the exact moment I would need it. He thinks of details for tenderness like other people think of where they put their keys. We still have days where every object is too sharp and every request is a landmine. But last night he stood in the doorway to the living room, hair sticking up like he'd been electrically charged by sleep, and tapped twice on the frame, announcing, not knocking. He climbed into my lap and pushed my shoulders down and said, solemn as a pilot making radio contact, requesting landing. I asked him what the weather was like up there. He said, in that tiny serious voice he saves for truths, clear enough. He put my hand over his heart and then covered it with both of his like he was locking a hatch. We sat there while the house breathed around us, and I could feel us come down without any alarms, just that soft hiss tires make when they meet the runway, right where they're supposed to. He said, into my shirt, you heard me at the museum. You'll hear me again. And I said the thing that has become the only thing that matters, I'm on your frequency. He nodded, satisfied, and left my hand there a little longer, not to hold him, just to hold him together, and the sky outside did what it always does when we do this right. It stayed exactly the same.